My name is Andrea, and I'm a contributing writer on science at the Financial Times. And it was very interesting because the first four speakers we heard were very much from the technical side, on the jobs, on the legislative side. And as a scientist who became a journalist, I suppose what I try to do as a commentator is try to take the temperature of where we are sort of with robots in society. And I do know that sort of artificial intelligence and autonomous systems is a really, really big issue of interest for my editors, and they're reflecting their readers' interests as well. So robots are very much on my mind, and one of the reasons is that just recently the FT awarded its Business Book of the Year to a book called The Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford, which is a somewhat dystopian view of the effect of robots on the economy. So we'll come to that shortly. And the other reason that robots are on my mind is because I've driven up to, I would say Bristol region from London, and I shall probably drive back tonight, but I did think to myself, wouldn't it be lovely if I could have an autonomous car drive me back? So I'm not going to fall asleep at the wheel. That would be brilliant. And it just illustrated sort of how far we've moved in the last 20 years, is that there are things that human beings do very, very well, but there are certain things that really robots could probably do better. So getting on to the discussion, we've got two panels tonight. The first one is on the robot economies. And Sabine Howard, who has organised this, has asked each of the panellists to set out their stall for a minute, maybe tell us what the role of robots in the future economy will be. And then we'll see if that provokes any thoughts among the panellists, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Well, actually, before I do that, just taking the temperature, I did go on at about 1:30. Yes.
It was apparently difficult for folk to hear at the back.
Can you? Yes. Should I come a bit closer? I'll bring it back. Can you hear me now? Yes, great. Sorry about that. So, about taking the temperature of robots, I did go on about 5:30. I went onto Twitter to see what was trending under the hashtag robots. And one was the World Robot Conference has kicked off in Beijing, so the world has gone robot crazy. The World Economic Forum was tweeting, can we predict what jobs will be replaced by robots? And of course, because it's the internet, Hasbro has invented a robot cat for the elderly, because you can't have an internet without cats. So can I ask the panellists to set out their stall, going from left to right, please, on this issue of robot economies?
Okay, it was quite difficult to think of something in 1 minute, but we actually launched our product last month in Japan. And I think one key thing, given what I've heard so far this evening, is that in the space of 4 weeks, we've saved people nearly 250,000 hours worth of their time in Japan that they don't have to be vacuuming.
Hello, I'm the lawyer of the bunch, and first of all, I think that law should be seen not as something scary, at least from engineers, but something that is enabling. Basically, an adequate legal framework is key to allowing the development of a robotic industry, of taking ideas from the laboratories to the market, and that is of extreme relevance, at least as much as the investment in research itself. So we need to think in very practical terms as lawyers in order to develop concrete solutions to specific problems, and that is what I'm trying to do.
So now we have David Bisset.
Thank you. So my background here is looking at what robots will do. What will they do in the UK? What will they do across Europe? And how do we make that happen? How do we get those robots into the marketplace? How do we actually build an economy? It comes in two parts. One is obviously an economy for robot manufacturers, people in Europe who will make money from manufacturing robots. The second part of that is the people who will service those robots when they get out into the marketplace. And they will actually go out through an enormous number of different marketplaces across Europe and across the UK. So at the moment we tend to think of robots as maybe only being in factories, making cars, making white goods. But in fact, in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll find robots in hospitals, in warehouses, driving along the road, in our cities, as well as in factories. So we will actually start to meet robots a lot more over the next 10 or 20 years. And there is a huge opportunity for actually for delivering robots into these different areas, which will create the economy and change the economy, in some cases quite disruptively. But all of that will depend on investment, and it will depend on people actually investing in the companies that will build the robots and the companies that will service them and install them into these different vertical markets, which is timely because I'm going to pass it to Renaud.
So Renaud Champion from Robolution Capital, which is a private equity fund specialising in robots.
Hello everyone. So yes, I'm the financial guy of the table, and thank you, David, for a transition. Yes, my job is to make sure that what David just described is happening by investing money, knowledge, and making sure startups have opportunities to create products, to sell their products, and to meet their customers. I would like, two things in the introduction that were presented by Chris and Maddie. First thing is that I also deeply believe that robotics is a strong economic opportunity for Europe and societal opportunity for Europe. We have great universities, we have great labs, we have great entrepreneurs, we have incubators, we have end users who can buy such systems, we have a wide range of different customers who can also buy those systems. The real issue, and that's what Maddie said, is we in Europe are diverse. And this diversification should be seen as a strength, but there is a threat which is called fragmentation, so that we don't collaborate. And that's something we clearly need to address, not only on the ethical and legal framework, but also in terms of collaboration, having hubs connected to each other, and to make sure that those great researchers, those national markets can interact and make sure that we have unicorns coming in the way.
Amanda.
Thank you very much. So I suppose my perspective on this is the utility of robots or autonomous systems. So councils do a lot of stuff around economic development, fantastic part of our jobs, but 60% of what we do is social care, and of that, the vast bulk of that is adult social care. And immediately, thank you so much for your demonstration, because it just again, it sets the scene so beautifully. So why is that important to us? It's important to us for two reasons, I think. One, because you're all advocates for robots and autonomous systems in this room. The second reason that it matters, and if you pardon me for being a little depressing, is there's 170 people in the room. And if we just assume 50% women, 50% men, so for the girls, about 12 of us will develop dementia. And for the men, only about 6 of you will develop dementia. Good news, you think, but that's actually because you died sooner. And then for the girls as well, we'll spend at least 2.5 years on average on our own at the end of our lives, because our husbands and partners will have died before us. The really scary statistic is we're a really educated group. That means you are much more likely to live to a very old age. But for men, again, you will spend about 14 years at the end of your life on average with a disability or other illness. And again, for us girls, I'm afraid it's worse, because we live longer. For us, it will be about 18 years at the end of our lives with some degree of disability and illness. And that's why this stuff is so important. It's absolutely important to keep us safe and well and healthy and clean and warm and fed in our homes. So the kind of systems that we'll be able to pick up when we sort of bed, whether we've fallen over, whether we've eaten, whether we've our diabetes is out of control, that keeps us at home, which is where every single one of us will want to be, is fantastic. And then where that leaves us as well is that whole debate, and I think it was beautifully set up as well by maybe, was that whole thing about if actually, when frailty does hit us all, and I hope it is very late for all of us, actually who will be our guardians, who will be our advocates, and how does robotics shift that kind of control to make sure that you do maintain control for as long as possible. I think the interesting bit about what does it do for jobs, and I think it changes jobs, not necessarily loses them. So actually, what will robots be able to do and what won't they be able to do? So again, what will be the human jobs that we will need? The getting up, the dressing, the bathing, the feeding, the delivering you a hot meal, all of those tasks, how much of that can be done by a person, how much of that will be done by a robot. And then I suppose my very last question, and it was really fascinating to watch this today, was the bit about human contact. You may be very warm and comfortable and healthy and safe in your house, but where does comfort come from? Where does human contact come from? Where does physical contact come from? Where does love come from? And I think all of those change, don't they, as we start thinking about the implication of robotics.
On that cheery note, we'll move on to. I think it's a very impassioned comment there. Andrew Graham from OCRobotics.
So thank you for those quite big thoughts. OCRobotics is a almost 20-year-old company now, but for the last dozen years we've been doing what we call snake-arm robots, and these are things that get into really hard-to-reach spaces. And what we initially set the company up to do was to do some innovative medical stuff. Unfortunately, we discovered that someone in Switzerland had patented it about 6 months before we filed ours. So we were looking for other applications, and what we've done ever since is deliver robots that enable people to get out of the really unpleasant places to be. The thing that has paid our bills over the years is maintenance and inspection of nuclear reactors. We're not enabling the robot to do the job independently of people. We're simply taking those experts who would have done the job anyway and allowing them to be safer and more comfortable while the robot actually gets in there and gets its hands dirty. More recently, we're doing things in civil engineering where you're just taking people out of really dangerous spaces for one reason or another and enabling those same people to do their job. And we have, it's been a real success story in the civil engineering industry that experts in their field are able to pick up these robots, and so we're not changing the people who do the jobs, we're just changing the way they do the job. That's something that we see OCRobotics continuing to do into the far future. Some of the more ambitious things that have been talked about already, and particularly home assistants in hospitals and so on, are worthy subjects of research. I think they're very early stage, and I wouldn't be surprised if I don't see that kind of autonomous assistant in the home in my lifetime. But the ambition needs to be pursued. One of the really promising things that I see at OCRobotics is that people who are coming into the company as fresh graduates have a different background. They see robotics as more commonplace. They have bigger ambitions for what it can do. They've got knowledge of new technologies, whereas an old fogey like me who's been working on it for 25 years perhaps is not the person to bring the new developments through.
I'm going to move you on. Alan Manning, who's Professor of Labour Economics at the LSE.
Yes, I'm going to talk about the fears mentioned earlier that robots are going to be very bad for workers. And there's a very long history, actually, of fears that new technology is going to be bad for workers. And although there are some groups of workers for whom that has been the case, essentially everybody has benefited in the past, ultimately, from new technology. There's no guarantee that the future is going to be exactly like the past, but when I read many of the sort of prophecies of doom surrounding robots at the moment, I feel that many of those accounts make the same mistake which those past predictions made. And that mistake is to focus too much on the direct, very visible, sometimes negative impact of robots on specific groups of workers, and to ignore the wider, more diffuse benefits. So basically, when a person is replaced by a machine or a robot, it's because it lowers costs. As costs go down, prices fall. Consumers who buy those products and then can buy those products, have more money left over to spend on other things. And as they spend it on other things, they employ other workers, whether they're hairdressers, not me obviously, but I believe some people do go to hairdressers. Everyone else, but it sounds almost ridiculous to say that hairdressers are benefiting from the introduction of robots, but it's actually very true. And to ignore that is really to miss what is perhaps the main positive impact of new technology on the labour market.
That sounds like a great headline to me. So moving on to Phil Williams, who's from the Robotics and Autonomous Systems Special Interest Group at the Knowledge Transfer Network.
Thank you. It's interesting that tomorrow we're expecting some news from our Chancellor about cuts, and it's something that concerns me, and I'm sure it concerns a lot of people in this room, about just how big and deep these cuts will be, and maybe the discussion about where these cuts are being forced on us will be for a different type of group. But just some figures. The EU Commission has estimated that the global market for robotics and autonomous systems to be around about 15.5 billion euros. UKTI has estimated it to be something around the order of $25 billion. Some colleagues of ours in aerospace think that's about £265 billion, the market for robotics and autonomous systems. It gets better. McKinsey, they forecast that for advanced robotics, this could be of the order of 4.5 trillion US dollars. Clearly, forecasting is not a precise science, right? But whatever it is, the numbers are big. And the argument, especially at the time when we're looking at austere times, is why is the UK not really ready to take advantage of this? And what can we do in order to take advantage of these opportunities? Because companies, and a lot of these opportunities will be for small and medium-sized companies, to build the products that we can sell nationally and globally, will be the companies that generate jobs and growth. Now that's all a bit maybe impersonal. I am, a father, as many of us have families, and I worry about the sort of landscape that my children will grow up in. My 9-year-old daughter recently told me that she and her friends have thought about becoming building a fashion house in Bath, right? Very interesting. How are they going to do that? Well, it's interesting that some of the technologies that we think will come along, like for example manufacturing, and the advances in manufacturing, the ability to bring manufacturing back to the UK, may well be the same technologies that enable her to have her dream in 10, 15 years' time.
Thank you very much. She should become a hairdresser. I think that's where the jobs are. So I'm getting the sense from the panel then that robots are a good thing for the economy, that they're going to drive our future, but perhaps we need to be a bit more positive in taking advantage of the landscape. Am I getting the right sense here? Yes, please. So Mike from Head of Robotics at Dyson.
So I think one of the things I would say is that it's going to be a gradual process. I think it was interesting to hear about C3PO or R2D2. It's one that I always think, actually, if I had C3PO walking through my house, I think my 5-year-old and 3-year-old would be pretty scared. And the key thing here is it's going to be a gradual evolution where we go through and see more and more things in the home being made autonomous, and then user acceptance gradually grows, and then along with acceptance comes anticipation. So then people actually begin to want that additional autonomy. So I think there are massive benefits to be had, but we just need to temper ourselves a little bit with the reality of A, what's achievable, but also what would people accept at this point in time. I know you mentioned about the Google car. Actually, realistically, would you get in a Google car now? It's an interesting question. Not many people would.
Yeah, I do take your point on that. It's and I've had some conversations about this with people. I think a well-tested car on an adapted highway, I think I would be quite happy to get into one. Out of interest, who else would get into a driverless car?
I was just going to point out there was a survey run by the Transport Systems Catapult, and only 39% of people said they would use an autonomous vehicle.
I think that's quite high, actually. I think that's quite high, and actually that looks about reflective of where we are in the room. Do you think, panel, that people underestimate how much intelligence we use already in our lives? When I think about, I bought an electric car last year, and it can tell how, it can there's automatic braking, it can park itself, which is quite freaky, I have to say. I sort of look around at the things in my home, and actually they're pretty intelligent. do we underestimate how much there is in our gadgets? Thinking of my iPhone.
I suppose one thing that kind of links to your previous question. I think one of the things, because it's your point about, bits and pieces developing at a time, but the benefit is when you start to join up all those bits and pieces. So, there are lots of things. You're right already. One of the Bath schools invented a doorbell that works on your fingerprints. Clearly I've got a particular interest in why that might be useful in terms of safety and security of clients. But you can do that. You can have a map that then you bounce on. It tells you what's up, and if you don't bounce back off in the next 10 minutes, it recognises that you've probably fallen in your home. We have fridges that now recognise that you haven't shut. But I think the real power of that stuff is when they join up. So that they join up with big data, they join up with systems that actually understand how your health data can be monitored, how you can work out when there's a health episode, and how it understands how to only flag when there's an issue that's worth calling in resources. And I think that's the interesting bit for me is the point at which you just feel on the cusp of some of this stuff starting to really join up. And I think that's where the benefit comes. It's not there's the fascinating individual research and technology, but it's when it's linked to something else.
I want to open it up to the floor. If people have questions, please raise your hands. We've got a roving mic, and we can. I'd love to have some questions on the floor. There must be something you want to ask this distinguished panel. I certainly would love to know what we need to do as in terms of these economies. In the next sort of year, 5 years, what do we need to do to sort of position ourselves at the forefront of the robot economy, I suppose?
If you're talking about Europe and the UK, we need to make sure that we're ahead in terms of the technology. That's something we've really got to make sure. Also, has been mentioned this evening is STEM, the STEM subjects at schools. We've really got to stimulate younger children coming through. I know the second debate this evening is surrounding that, but that is critical. But what we also have to do is we have a lot of robots in research labs, and they need to get out. They need to actually get in and be used. They need to have companies behind them who are going to actually bring them out into the marketplace. And one of the problems with that is regulation, and the second problem is actually testing. So if you have a robot in a lab which you think is going to help an elderly person, there are a stream of regulatory and ethical issues with actually taking that robot out and actually putting it into an elderly person's home with the expectation it is actually going to care for.
So it's a red tape issue as well.
It's ethical as well as red tape. It's a combination.
I know that we've got a lady who wants to ask a question.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my name is Nicola Strong. I'm really interested in the idea of personality of robots. I've got a question for you. Do you think giving robots or any artificial intelligence technology a personality will improve our productivity as humans? I'd love to hear from all of you.
Would you, Andrea?
I'm not so sure I understand what you mean by personality.
I'm taking it that it would be your standard understanding of how you'd measure personality in a human. So the ability, the difference of extrovert, introvert, thinking, judging.
We had that wonderful demo earlier, and that was touched on at the end with the personality. You don't just have it looks cute. That's why we all relate
so
to
that's to me one of the problems with robotics. That's deceptive. And to some extent we want it to be deceptive, but to some extent we should also clarify what we're doing, because that's risk being unethical. In the end, we saw the robot moving and we thought it was skewed, but it was actually a human being that was fully controlling the machine. So to that extent, the robot was not so different from a food processor or any other very common device that we have at home. But we all have a tendency to develop attachment to that thing. So that is one very relevant issue that we need to take into account from an ethical standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint, because I think that producers should be should take that risk into account and not to excessively, increase human attachment to the machine. The human should be capable at all moments to fully understand that whether he's talking to a human being that is using a tool or whether it's talking to something else. But if you take into account the Paro, the toy that is used for people with Alzheimer quite successfully, that stimulates an attachment to a thing that is quite disputable to me, I think. But to go back very briefly on what was just said about the necessity of an adequate legal system, I do fully agree that the two problems is the clarity of the legal system and the fact that we need to do testing and we need to have systems that enable testing. The adequacy of the legal system, however, needs to be measured in really concrete terms and not too much running after big, innovative solutions such as attributing the robot legal personhood and this kind of stuff. It should not be an eye-catcher. It should be a very practical, technical solution to a specific legal issue.
Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the economy. We have a quick. Can I take this lady's question, please, and then we'll come back to the panel.
I just wanted to pick up on the idea of getting into a Google car. I mean, the idea of getting into a car is fine, but the thing that's more worrying is the issue of the big data and also in relation to the economy, the fact that it's going to be generating this kind of, it feels like the capital flows are going to be in very limited places. And I suppose I just wanted to comment about that in relation to this kind of technology that's very capital intensive.
I think that's very, very interesting. Actually, Alan, would you like to take that point about, there is that, I suppose you're articulating this idea that as we become sort of more automated, there's more and more power concentrated in fewer corporations, fewer hands.
Yes, I mean, I think that, one thing people are doing, people's information about them is valuable to companies. And when at the moment we use Google for free and things, what we don't really realise is that we're basically giving them our information for free. So I think what is important is that whether the information about yourself is your personal property, so that you can possibly sell it to somebody. And there may be many things which you're not that bothered about, actually other people knowing about what your current state of your health is, to give one example. There may be other situations in which you're prepared for other people to have it in return for they give you something for it. So, but I think the important thing is to think that, information about oneself is one's personal property. And
how do we get around that?
Well, it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, at the moment, I'm not. I can talk in the abstract. I don't know technically how feasible this is, but you could imagine a situation in which, unless you ticked a box and took a payment from Google, they're not allowed to use any of your information whatsoever. And if they did without your permission, it's theft, as it would be if they took something else.
There are two other panellists who want to say something. Phil first, and then Renaud. And be brief, please.
There's a couple of points here. One, this isn't necessarily a robotics issue. This is a beta issue. And, it's quite common for everybody to walk around with their mobile phones tracking them all the time, and nobody says anything or is worried about it. If they are, we don't make a big deal about it. On the flip side, with autonomy in vehicles, the Department of Transport last year published a report that said the cost of reported accidents cost the economy £15 billion in 1 year. And that was just reported accidents. If you included the unreported accidents, it cost the economy £30 billion. This is the police, the traffic jams, the accidents, time away from work, etc., etc. I think, we've kind of, if you then forecast through how the introduction of robotics cars or autonomous vehicles can start to impact that, we think that with just 5% fewer crashes as a result of autonomous vehicles, we would be saving £1.5 billion in the economy. By the time you get to 50%, obviously it's around £15 billion added to our economy. So on the flip side, on the one side you've got this issue about data that actually isn't really a robotics issue. I don't think my children even will, by the time that they're at 18, they've got to the point where mobile phones are tracking them. It's not a big issue for them. It might be an issue for us, and somebody needs to address it. But on the flip side, the technology advantages that things like robotics and autonomous systems can bring can have a massive impact to our economy. Yes, we've got to address it, but I think it needs to be put into perspective.
I think some of these questions are going to come up again in the next panel discussion on ethics. Renaud, and if we can bring it back to economies.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the previous question regarding big groups keeping all the market. There is something called the Innovator Dilemma, which is a good thing, meaning that big corporates don't know how to innovate. So that's the good news.
What's it called? What's it called?
Yeah,
the dilemma? Sorry.
The Innovator Dilemma.
Innovation.
So that's why we have startups. What does that mean? Even at Google, what do they do at Google? They acquire entire departments at universities to launch a new sub-project. So what does that mean? It means that big end users, big corporates, they are so to speak, stuck in their day-to-day business with people to be paid and so on and so forth, that they are not free to innovate the way they want. So that's why startups have something to do. That's why we need to support startups. And I'm preaching for my own church, of course. Excuse me.
Great.
And that's why we have this. And it's important to make sure that this flow of innovators coming from research or can also spin out from big corporates, like you have chief engineers getting out of big corporation to start a brand new company. So that's a solution. That's how you spread the knowledge. And there is today an increasing number of what we call unicorns. Unicorns, from my perspective, is a company, is a startup that is reaching the $1 billion in valuation. So many new companies are going to that level, and that's good news. It means that very young companies, they identify the technology, they identify the need, and then they create products, and then they can become bigger and bigger. So no, I'm not really totally depressed about having big corporates as long as we support startups.
And I feel it's very fitting for the Dyson guy to have almost the last word on robot economies.
I can't let that one lie. So I wouldn't describe this as a big company, but actually it's the mentality of the people running the companies that is the difference, not the size of the company. So we put £3 million of research per week back into the company, and we innovate, and we do create new products, but we're getting bigger. And that comes from a boss who actually says the only way you're going to generally make a difference is to innovate, and to innovate you need to fund research. So it's not about the size of the company, it's about the mentality of the people who run it.
Excellent. Did anyone have a burning question on the economy? Because if not, I'd like to move on to the next panel discussion, which means we're going to get some musical chairs here. Was there any and is it on the economy?
Yeah.
Go then. I give you permission. Thank you. And say who you are, please, if it's relevant.
I'm Douglas Reader. I'm a first-year electrical undergraduate at Bristol, and I've been following the news and looking at how the UK are trying to become the world leaders in autonomous the cars and so on. Whereas with now Apple and Google and so on weighing in, what's to stop me taking the skills that I'll hopefully have by the end of my degree, taking them over to America rather than stay here in smaller companies?
There you go. So we train up these people and then we have our brain drain. Would anyone like one person to address this idea of that's the problem with skilling up a workforce is then they go to where the money and the jobs are?
Yeah, of course, and I'm very aware of stories of Google and Apple and Uber coming into the universities in the UK and offering enormous pots of gold to anybody who's prepared to go and join their wonderful enterprises in the US. We have to actually do something here that's going to keep people here. And the people that stay because they actually want the lifestyle that they can get here. They want to live here, they want to work here, and they actually care about the UK or about Europe. And there are a percentage that will do that, but we do also, need to create the companies, as Renaud is saying, give people the opportunity to start up on their own, because Google and Uber and Apple will not give you that opportunity. What they want to do is to take what you know, extract it from you, and use it. You have the opportunity here to generate an SME, to get a startup going that you own, you control, and you will gain the benefit from. And that is something you can only get with being where you are.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent point at which to wrap up that sort of very positive note on what the role of robots in the economy. I'd like to invite the next panel up, please. I know some of you are overlapping.